this stage
Yeah,
and seeing you. Yes, I'm
yeah.
slightly more relieved now. Yes.
I apologize for all that. Next time we're just going to make an account for people, and it'll be a little bit easier because I know a lot of us, including me, are not amazingly technically savvy, so it helps. But yeah, I'm so excited that you're here today. What did you so what was I going to ask you? Oh, are you teaching right now?
Yeah, I actually started my flexible retirement a couple of years ago, so I don't teach very much anymore. I
Okay.
do once a year teach master students, but largely the people that I supervise now um,
Yeah.
are in their 30s and 40s. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm 40, so. Well, all right. And this is just basically, we kind of email corresponded. This show is called the Pangburn Dialectics Series. You're the first one. I've done this show in the past with other people, Donald Hoffman, Lawrence Krauss, all kinds of people. But we're starting it again, and we're kind of going much more academic because that's what I love, and that's what we want to instill in people is the love of learning. So, fallibly. But no, I've long loved your work. Predictive processing is a super interest of mine, and we can get it all into that because I'd love to go over FEP and Markov and everything else. And there's no holds barred here, so you go as deep as you want to, and we'll work with it. So usually I introduce people, but may I ask you to introduce yourself? Would that be okay?
yes, of course, yeah. So my name's Karl
Excellent.
Friston. I'm a professor of neuroscience at University College London in the United Kingdom.
And he's a very nice man. All right. So, guys, I guess we can just go ahead and start out and jump in. I mean, to understand Professor Friston, we kind of have to understand the physics of thingness. A very cool thing. His work is not just a theory of the brain. It's basically a mathematical description of how any system, anything, a cell, a person, galaxy, manages to stay itself over time instead of dissolving into entropy or environmental chaos, however you want to frame that linguistically. I love that idea. There's there's so much to cover in this because I deeply agree with this idea because in terms of ontology, I hold to a personal form of monism and informational structural realism, but I also am very open. You know what I mean? I'm not an absolutionist when it comes to the state of affairs ontology, but when it comes to mental ontology, I love it. That is where I live. Human cognition, consciousness, mental ontology. That is my favorite area to play around in. So when it comes to the free energy principle, I would like to explain to everybody, it's a mathematical imperative. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So any self-organizing system, guys, that exists in any environment, by definition, must minimize variational free energy. Now that's a really cool topic. That's a really cool idea. And I mean, basically, if you want to explain it, you can. If not, I'll paraphrase. I love it either way.
Well, you're doing an excellent job so far, so I'm delighted to hear how you
Yeah,
paraphrase it.
absolutely. So, guys, in the professor's world, surprising states, those that are incompatible with survival. And I mean, this is technically, could I call this the math of human survival or the math of survival for any system?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could frame it in terms of sustainability, persistence, endurance, living, surviving. These are all characteristics. The first thing that you would associate with anything, it
Uh-huh.
survives. It's there.
Yep. And that is it. And so, to avoid these surprising states, a system must minimize surprise. So here's the thing: since a human brain can't calculate, surprise, like it's computationally impossible for a brain to calculate actual surprise. I mean, it goes based on priors and Bayesian reasoning, all kinds of other things. But it's kind of like, I guess the best way to understand it is like this free energy is like an upper bound to for surprise itself in the system, if that makes sense. And surprise, of course, is a shift in. We'll get there. So if any system minimizes free energy, it's implicitly minimizing the chance of survival, right? Or not minimize. Sorry, maximizing the chance of survival. Is that would I be correct in saying that? Okay. So I mean, what brought you to understanding this? Now, obviously math, but like what other intuitions brought you to these ideas?
Um, I think a convergence of my work in the neurosciences and psychiatry about how we work, how
Mm,
we make sense of the world, um,
mhm.
and a, a preoccupation with making the sense of empirical data as a sort of a brain imaging scientist, as a neuroscientist. Much of my career has been about how to model medical time series, neuroimaging time series. Um, and of course, the convergence of questions, how does the brain work and how do you make the
Mhm.
best sense of data, is that the brain makes best sense of its data. So then you get into the physics of sense making, sometimes referred to the physics of sentience. Um,
Yeah.
and you have to write it down in terms of maths and physics, certainly when you're applying these principles to actual empirical data, say brain imaging
Deep.
data, climate change
Mhm.
data, or any other kind of data. So it's important to get the maths right. Um, and in looking at the maths, you start to ask some obvious but rather deep questions, such as when we're talking about things like you and me, you have to ask, well, how on earth do I define a thing? You've already told people how to do it via this notion of a Markov blanket, um,
Mm.
and in so doing, you appeal now to the physics of self-organization, which would admit a separation between something and everything else. And then
Yes.
you immediately encounter this notion that the thing has to be open to the world in which it lives. And as such, there has to be a bidirectional traffic between the thing, the self, for example, and the non-self. Um,
Yeah.
and part of that bidirectional traffic um, is the influence of the outside on the inside, which is just the sensory data.
Yes.
It's the data
Yeah.
that we acquire as living creatures when we palpate the
Mhm.
world with our eyes or listen with our ears, or as a scientist that I would be acquiring when acquiring brain imaging data from a subject or a patient, for example. It is exactly the problem of understanding how the influence of the outside on the inside, the influence of the non-self on the self,
Yes.
manifests as sense making and making the best use of those data.
It's wonderful. And that's, yes, guys, I mean, this is mathematically elegant, and predictive processing is a fact as far as I'm concerned. The funny part is that the community thinks this is a bit radical with active. We'll get to active inference. Okay, so let's talk about the Markov blanket because that is a cool thing. You just talked about it, defining what a boundary is. Now, when I said I am a metamonist, basically I just consider the state of affairs a entities, relations, properties, objects, whatever, interdependent. So basically, I believe in some kind of non-mystical interdependence. That's basically where I start from. If you want to get very meta and base level, but with the Markov blanket, guys, it's probability theory, and it basically defines where a system ends and where the world begins. And when you think about it in terms of interdependence, where objects and properties all blend and relations all blend in and the spaces between, and they interact with each other. And this is kind of how I mean, technically, this is what happens inside the human body with neuroplasticity and everything. But it's not like a physical wall. It's like a statistical partition between the world and the internal states, I guess you could say. So it consists of like four of these states. It's basically like internal states. That's what Professor was talking about. The you, the self, the actual instrument that you use to organize your narrative, your language, everything else. External states, those are going to be the world, right? That's going to be our system bleeding in. You know, bleeding is not the best word, but you get what I'm saying. Sensory states, the blanket, information coming in. Active states, the blanket, actions going out. Here's the thing. This kind of ties to Kant, doesn't it, Professor?
Oh yes, yes.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you could even go right back to Plato, but I think Kant
Yeah.
is probably the best place to start. And I like starting
Yep.
there. I don't know very much about Kantian philosophy,
Hmm.
but I do know that Helmholtz, of course, inherited a lot of those
Yes.
concepts from
Hmm.
Kantian thinking, and I'm a great fan of Helmholtz.
I do
Um,
too. He's great.
so,
Yeah.
so certainly this. I've been told I'm a transcendental idealist, but no one will tell me what that means.
I've
So
read your work and you're not, I've read your work and you're not a transcendental idealist, and this is why. Because basically, Kant said that we can only know our phenomenological subjective experience. Back then, they didn't know any neuroscience, obviously. And basically, we mediated our understanding of the world through that phenomenological experience. And he called what we could not see through our five senses the noumena, and what we did inside of us subjectively, the phenomena. And so, therefore, the noumena, by definition, is never accessible. But now today, it's not that mystical and like almost, it's not magical, but he had some kind of weird Platonic idea about it that it's not useful. But basically, what I'm saying is I don't separate the a priori phenomenological experience and the a posteriori contact friction with the world. I don't, because I use synthesis cognition. Like I literally start from synthesis rather than seeing two objects and synthesizing later. I start with interdependence and then I separate out if I need to teach or speak or use language. Does that make sense?
yes, I mean, I like your use of the word interdependence there. I mean,
Yes.
purely from a mathematical point of view, that is the essence of the Markov blanket. It
Yes.
induces, or it only exists in virtue of there being a conditional independence that allows you to separate me from everything else, or
When I
me
read
from you, and so
conditional,
forth.
yeah, when I read conditional I was clapping because you had said the exact same thing that I've been saying the whole time. Why do people think this is radical?
I didn't know that they did,
Some people
especially
that
if
I
you
heard,
can.
with active inference anyway, some people think that that's a bit, too radical in traditional biology. And I was reading that, I was like, maybe that's not a lot of people, but I came across that a couple of times. I was like, wow, that's not really that radical to me. So, especially if you know the evidence.
Well, yeah, and it's certainly not radical to me, in virtue of the fact that these ideas, I do think, inherent from centuries of thinking. In
Hmm.
fact, you could regard the current focus on predictive processing when equipped with action. We're talking about active inference, basically. You could,
Yeah.
sort of regard this as a reversion to deep thinking in the 19th century. Now equipped with a physics and
Yeah.
benefiting or inheriting from the sort of formalism that people like Richard Feynman and other theoreticians have brought to the table, is to sort of be able to write it down in terms of a physics of sentience. But I think the underlying ideas have been, been around for centuries. So that's why I'm slightly surprised to hear that people
Well,
find
I
it.
mean, it wasn't a lot. It wasn't a lot, and I didn't mean that to jump your heart up, but like, it was weird to me that, I guess you could say the psychology neuroscience world thinks, uh, see a tiger, then run. You know what I mean? But you and I see an active inference, so we're like, perceptual and action is simultaneous. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I see. Yes. No, I see. So if you're, yeah, there is certainly, I think, there has been a paradigm shift, a sea change at the turn of the century away from behaviorism, away from um, the
Functionalism.
understanding the
Yeah.
way that we engage with the world simply through state action policies of the kind you'd find in behavioral psychology or reinforcement learning.
Yep.
Uh, and a much greater emphasis now on active sensing and active vision, that you cannot separate action from perception. There's this, it's one of these strange inversions of Dan Dennett would say, but I think beyond that there's a circular causality, and of course
Hmm.
it is that bi-directional traffic across our Markov boundaries, our Markov blankets, that induces that
Yes.
interdependency of a particular sort, interdependency between the inside and the outside in this instance. So,
Yeah.
that allows people, or people like me at least, and people like you, I guess, to say that this boundary doesn't insulate you from the world, it glues you to the world. It separates, but it also joins you. And of course, because it's bi-directional, you have
This
action
is
and
why. Yeah.
perception.
Oh, that's so perfect. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just get excited. That is why philosophers tie themselves in knots, because they don't look at cognitive science-based epistemology. They'll be like, okay, it's got to be a priori, it's got to be rational, it's got to be empirical, and you're like, guys, there is no. It's just a linguistic duality. There's no separation in your neurons, as far as I know. You know what I mean, in terms of these interactions with the world and the processing through labeled vines and everything. How do you separate any of that? It's all interdependent in my brain. So crazy. Anyway, so so basically, the professor is saying, guys, we don't move through life in our body because we want to. We move because we are fulfilling a prediction that we are moving through life. So action is the resolution of a discrepancy between where the brain thinks the body should be and where it currently is. Now, this is where predictive processing comes in. And I'm just going to kind of briefly go over that, and then we're going to dig deep for a minute. So guys, this is process theory in neuroscience of how the brain actually implements the free energy principle that our friend has come up with. In this model, the brain is not a passive sponge at all. I mean, I guess it may have those qualities in a certain lens, but that is not the whole picture by any means whatsoever. So this is the weird thing about me. I don't call it weird. Because of my synthesis cognition, I think in terms of top-down predictions and bottom-up prediction errors simultaneously. But that's just my cognition and just the way I've always thought. So top-down predictions, guys, are like at the higher level brain hierarchy, the higher levels, they send down Bayesian priors, which is like belief levels, guesses based on sensory information. It's not like guesses out of whole cloth, but regardless, to actual sensory data. So if there's a mismatch in that sensory data and what the prediction is, an error is sent back up to the top hierarchical levels. Now, the bottom-up prediction levels, errors, excuse me, these lower levels compare these guesses that I was talking about, these predictions, to actual sensory data. So this is where it processes. If there's a mismatch, sorry, did I read that again? I apologize. These are all my notes. So attention, this is where I was getting to. This is precision weighting. The brain decides how much volume, which is really cool when I studied this, to give to a prediction error. And this is a thing when you're actually sitting around and you can neurophenomenologically understand this as it's going on. You don't have to understand every receptor and like neurotransmitter and everything, but like to a degree that my body is predicting error here, or my body is predicting such and such. It's really cool to try to live with it, and it works. But attention. I want the professor to talk about this. So it's like when the brain decides how much volume to give a prediction error. If let's say you're in a dark room, a very dark room, your sensory data is noisy. You can't really discern. You can't perceive very well. So your mind and body, your CNS, turns down the precision on the errors and relies more on internal priors to send down to the bottom. Did I get most of that right?
Yes, no, that's a beautiful description of Bayes' optimal sense making, getting the right balance between your prior beliefs and the quality of the evidence at hand. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell me about attention? Let's dive into that for a minute, because I think that's one of the biggest things here.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just sort of unpack what you said, because you people come across these notions.
It's a lot. Yeah. I mean, people can come back and watch the video, right?
So just to take that, the notion of a prediction error, I think is probably the most intuitive and useful way to think about surprise. And what you nicely articulated was the brain as a constructor of its own reality, within which you find all the interdependencies that you've been talking about, which is what I was intimating by sort of sense making. So how does it do that? Well, it does that in a very active way. It constructs explanations, hypotheses, fantasies. People like Neil Seth will call them hallucinations, illusions, whatever you want. They're explanations. So we're talking about inference to the best explanation. How do you get the best explanation? Well, the best explanation is that explains the data that renders it the least surprising. So how would you measure the surprise? Well, it's just the prediction error that you so aptly described. So in an inside-out way, I generate a prediction of what I would see if I'd inferred the right states of affairs out there that are always going to be hidden behind my Markov blanket, behind my sensory veil, as it were. So I can now understand sense making and perception as the process of minimizing or explaining away prediction errors that just is a process of inference to the best explanation. Of course, we can cast that in terms of Bayesian probability theory, so we can talk about Bayesian inference and priors and posteriors. But at the end of the day, it's just a calculus that allows you to think about surprise, free energy, prediction error. They're all just different ways of understanding the thing that you want to resolve, minimize, in order to render your sensory exchange with your world across your Markov blanket as unsurprising and characteristic as possible of the kind of thing that you are. So on that picture, you're absolutely right, and I'd say I go beyond sort of saying that this is an intuition about a process, and there's an enormous amount of empirical evidence that suggests that what you said in terms of these descending predictions, inside-out predictions towards the sensorium, are complemented by a counter stream of prediction errors ascending the deep hierarchies that constitute our brains. So again, you've got this sort of circular causality. You've got this recurrent message passing in the brain amongst hierarchical levels, descending predictions towards the sensory surface of the Markov blanket, and ascending prediction errors that report how good those predictions were. So notice, and I'm working my way towards attention here, notice that the prediction error is really the newsworthy part. It's the part of the sensory input that you have actively sampled that carries all the important news. It's what you didn't predict. It's what you haven't yet explained. Literally, like when you watch the news on your social media device or the television, you're watching it because you didn't predict that. It is information worthy. It is newsworthy. But very much like you have to choose which news channel to attend to, which social media you commit to, who to talk to, you have to very carefully select what is newsworthy and what is not. And this is where attention comes in. So attention can equip a prediction error with the ability to influence your belief updating and allow you to change your mind so that you can provide a better explanation. This is the process of inference to the best explanation. And that equipping is just attention. I can attend to this news channel or this news channel. Basically, turn up the volume, and exactly as you said, turn up the gain. Physiologically, that is thought to be mediated by literally increasing the gain of nerve cells that are reporting the prediction errors. And interestingly, it is exactly those mechanisms, postsynaptic gain mechanisms, that can be so severely and usefully, in many instances, affected by drugs of the kind we use in psychiatry, neurology, also psychedelics. And a psychoactive drug is basically the one that retunes the excitability of these prediction error reporting nerve cell or neuronal populations. So, attention plays an incredibly important part in picking out those kinds of sensory inputs or that kind of evidence that best
minimizing free energy
of sense making.
Hey,
go ahead.
Karl, Travis Pangburn here. A question about the news sorting process there. By what standard do you think the processing is being measured to? How is that selection process in a hierarchy? What's dominating there?
Right, that's a great question, and it's nice you use the word selection because, again, what we're talking about now is something that's quite active. I mean, to select is a verb, so we're in the world of active perception. It's just, now we're talking about action on the inside. So you can't see me attend, but I'm actively choosing to attend to your voice, to attend to the visual input that you're generating from your camera. So how do you optimize that? The answer in the world of active inference is very simple. It is quite simply attending to those sources, those parts of the sensorium, or those sources of sensory input that will resolve the greatest amount of uncertainty I have in my belief updating. To put that mathematically, I will select those, or I will attend to, using attentional selection, turn up the volume on those sources of sensory information that have the greatest information gain. And you can measure that mathematically through something called a Kullback-Leber divergence or relative entropy. But notice that basically means that the attentional selection is a function of what you don't know. So something will only grab my attention if I think it's going to resolve my uncertainty in this particular context. And furthermore, it will, as soon as it's grabbed my attention and it has resolved my uncertainty, I will no longer attend to it because there's no epistemic affordance, or there's no value, sometimes referred to as intrinsic value or intrinsic motivation.
Well,
this continue to attend to that.
Yeah, this intrinsic certainty sorting is one of the reasons why I promote fallibilism as the first Pangburnian virtue, because I think that kind of intrinsic nature is something that ought to be overcome, and in a practical sense, in what the good life would look like in serving our purposes. I think because certainty is almost certainly unattainable, it's kind of this system within us that comes to be a bug and not a feature epistemically. But I think survivalistically, it plays a key role. It's a very powerful source of survival. So, I think it's very interesting that we have these processes, but I also think we're at our nature, at some level, probably a level of abstraction above where we're talking, that we are also open to update in our nature, fallibilistic at our very nature as well. So there is an interesting contrast there between this certainty calculus, but the recognition of that it needs to keep happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a number of really important themes there. First of all, one has to acknowledge there is no truth pointing here. When we talk about inference is the best explanation, there is no truth there. It is just the best explanation that you have for your lived world. Right. I think that's important to acknowledge. And furthermore, it's a very delicate system that can easily go awry, and I think that's what you're intimating in terms of you can get quite a long way in explaining quite a lot of psychopathology if you don't get that attentional mechanism right.
Exactly. Yes.
It's very, very.
Professor, can you tell us real quick in a second about emotion and prediction error, because I think that's super important.
About emotional prediction error?
Yeah, sorry, emotion and prediction error. What, negative emotion and what it means in predictive processes.
Yeah. Well, I think that would come in two flavors. One, in fact, inherits from what we were just talking about, which is if you need to attend in the right kind of way and engage with the world in a way that's going to resolve your uncertainty, you have to be able to quantify your uncertainty. I think that's quite crucial. You can't do this if you don't have some representation or some not some personal belief about the uncertainty, about what's the state of affairs out there, and indeed what am I going to do in the next moment given those states of affairs. So we're constantly striving to resolve uncertainty. And just to sort of link it back to the earlier summary, expected surprise is just uncertainty, it's just entropy. So we're always striving to try and resolve uncertainty, where uncertainty is the average surprise I think I would get if I was witness to this event in the future. And that means that if you fail to resolve that uncertainty, that can sometimes be experienced with a very negative valence, with angst or anxiety, in a very straightforward way. Imagine yourself in a dark alley in a city that you've never been in before. So there's very little evidence that you can use to predict what's going to happen to you next, and therefore you don't know what to do next. So there's uncertainty everywhere, and particularly uncertainty about what you are going to do, as an agent in charge of gathering the next round of information. That is usually associated with negative affect and negative emotions. That's one story. I think it's important also to acknowledge the importance of the fact that we are embodied. The brain is embodied, and the body is quite a crucial sense organ in one sense. So we then also have the world of interoceptive inference. So there's affective inference, which is inferring what is my most likely state of mind at the moment that would allow me to deploy my precision or attend in the right kind of way to different levels of hierarchical representation, and indeed select the right attentional programs, or do the right kind of selection of attention. That's affective. One important source of evidence for the explanation for me being in this particular state of mind is my body. Literally gut feelings, cardio acceleration, all the cues of a sort of James Langian kind, or indeed Damasio kind, that would provide evidence that I am in this state of mind. So I may find my heart racing, and this might be evidence that I am uncertain, and therefore I am anxious. And if I'm anxious, I'm going to attend to different kinds of things than if I was relaxing, watching television, for example. So when you elevate these mechanisms of predictive coding, predictive processing, to different states of being as me, I think you have, you start to discern an architecture of belief updating, which has the attributes of emotionality and certainly sort of embodied aspects of being in certain mental states. We could go on to talk about how you'd understand abnormal moods, say depression, under this, or how you
go there.
if you want to. It's your turn to converse now. You tell me where you are.
Oh, my friend, I love hearing this because I've studied it for years. I enjoy this so much. So I guess we can now get into what the generative model is. Yeah. And so now I am trying to literally, with AI, live a generative model by checking myself, by checking my predictive processing, by CNS body and scanning and mapping synthetically while I do that. I have all the time in the world, by the way. This is what I do. So basically, can we, I guess I can explain a little bit, guys. The generative model in predictive processing is the map that the system has of the causal structure of the world, so to speak. It's what allows any of us to predict, if I drop this, it will fall. A healthy system is one that generates, that has a generative model that is complex enough to track the nuances in the environment, stuff like that, but simple enough not to overfit or get bogged down in useless details. That is a big thing to remember. That deals with the free energy principle and minimizing free energy. And so let's talk about the generative model. Can you tell me, that's basically like the meta model of predictive processing, right? Would that be a best way to say that?
Yes, I mean, it's absolutely central. The concept of a generative model is absolutely central to everything that we've been talking about. Just to go back to your explanation of predictive processing as generating predictions of what I would see if I had the correct explanation for the current state of affairs in the world. That is really why you need a generative model. You need to be able to generate predictions. So you have to have this sort of structured cause-effect structure embedded within a generative model and actually installed in your brain anatomy and your physiology. So you are effectively a generative model of your lived world, in the sense that you can now predict your exchange with with your world, and that basically means that the cause effect structure of your world should be replicated or installed in the anatomy of your generative model or your brain. And of course, it is, and you've intimated that by talking about sort of the hierarchical structure, literally a deep structure, very much like deep learning. The deep in deep learning just means it has hierarchical depth. So there are increasing layers of abstraction. So I like to think of it in terms like an onion, a concentric hierarchy. So you go deep into the brain, where things are, where the predictions that are generated are usually very abstract and will probably entail part of a self model of the kind that we're just talking about in terms of what state of mind am I currently in. And those increasingly abstract predictions contextualize and constrain more fine-grained, more modality-specific predictions right the way down to the sensory epithelia, or the sensory part, or indeed the motor part of your brain, which is now going to actually move your eyes or move your bodies or your autonomic system. So the generative model, yeah, I mean, and again, mathematically, you can't do any of this calculus or the physics of sentience without a generative model, simply because, as you started to explain right at the beginning, you can't actually measure surprise in its elemental form, because surprise is just the implausibility of some sensory impression given a model of the world. So you have to have a model of the world. But even if you have a generative model of how those sensory input were caused, it's mathematically impossible to work out the surprise. So you have to induce this free energy bound, which is tractable, something you can do with your physiology, you can do it with a computer, you can do it with your neuronal network, you can do it with a neural network. Yes, well, that's a good point. And that basically means that the free energy is a function of, or depends upon, some representation or explanation of the causes of your sensory input, conditioned upon or under a generative model. So the generative model doesn't in and of itself exist as an entity in your brain, but it's implicit or entailed by your brain, because you are making predictions, you're inferring the best explanation under the generative model that is implicit in the architecture of your brain. So it's absolutely central.
It is, and it is. I look at myself, my system, as a prediction processing, not engine, but interdependent system. But I also understand the phenomenological, narrative, linguistic, emotional overlay as well. I mean, when humans were healthy on the plains, we told stories to hunt and learn and all this kind of stuff. And so this is another time that I don't separate those kind of things when it comes to the actual cognitive science interacting in the state of affairs. Does that make sense? Like it's very difficult for people to always be like, well, this is only that thing. Does that make sense? On like a meta level, it just drives me crazy. Because I mean, I feel no different than the both of them. And I'll do stuff like if my body is feeling uneasy in any way, I'll speak with an AI and be like, okay, I have predictive processing programmed into the AI, and I'll say what's happening, and I'll pay attention to it, and we'll map it out the best that I can, and it really does help. At least at the system layer, not the narrative layer, but the system layer, it truly helps understand. Okay, my brain is predicting this. My CNS is predicting this. It's not the whole CNS is neuroplastic and dynamic and everything. That, but so I guess how does this deal with? Because I don't really like any of the theories of mind. I mean, obviously, computational is the main one right now. I love semiotic and all that stuff, but I think it's a bit more complex than that. I've kind of come up with my own little synthesis, theory of mind, at least for me. I don't know if it works for everyone, but it's more of a mental ontology, not, claiming there's anything inside neurons or anything physically. But yeah, I mean, we can, there's so many things to talk about. I don't even know where to go. Like, I want to talk about everything. I guess we could talk about Bayes a little bit, and because I want to explain to people in the audience what Karl has been talking about is abductive reasoning in philosophy. That is the inference to the best explanation. That is what Bayesian epistemology is. It is updating belief based on current reason and evidence, which is technically what predictive processing is, right?
Yeah, perfectly
So,
stated. Yes.
exactly. Yeah. And this with my work in psychotherapy and stuff, and I try to stay cutting edge. I am trying to help people that are in the absolute lowest places, and because I was there for 10 years, and this is why it became a passion of mine. And I am looking at predictive processing to understand how human cognition can go to those levels. And it's really interesting, the studies I've been doing for the last 5 years, and I can't express how much it is fun to talk to you about that. Andy Clark, by the way, has an invitation to the show as well. I would love to speak to him. All you guys are super awesome. So thank you for allowing me a little bit of fanboy status. What is your idea on the theory of mind then right now?
Well, can I just pick up on an important phrase you just used? Being stuck in a low place. I think if you can understand what that means in terms of self-modeling and the implications for the way that we actively engage with the world, I think that can be very useful. And it reminds me very much of stuck in a low place as being stuck in a rut. And you have to ask yourself, well, why do you get stuck in a rut? Why do you get stuck in a hard place? And it's usually because it's difficult to escape, by being trapped in a valley. And the interesting thing about that metaphor is that mathematically, that valley is part of this free energy landscape. It's part of this surprise landscape. So we've just said that we can describe ourselves as navigating through life in a way that tries to suppress surprise. So if I imagine myself navigating a landscape of surprise or free energy, that means I'm trying to follow the valleys and the orbits and the low places. But what happens if I carve myself such a deep riverbed, I can never get out of it? I will now get stuck in a low place, which from one point of view is Bayes optimal, but not if there is a better low place to be, or I can explore other technically free energy minima. Mathematically, the sharpness or the steepness or the degree to which you get trapped in these free energy or surprise minima corresponds exactly to the attention or the precision we were talking before. So before we were talking about how delicate assessing or quantifying one's uncertainty or precision. This is a precision that weights the prediction errors. It's the inverse of the uncertainty. It's the confidence or the credence that you give this source of information. It's the volume you turn up. As you turn up the volume, you actually increase the sharpness of the valley and make it more difficult to escape. And that, I think, is a really useful metaphor when you're trying to help a client in psychotherapy, because they've got stuck in a particular...
Directly to behavioral activation. It ties directly to behavioral activation because that is guys, behavioral activation, instead of thinking first and then changing behavior, is changing behavior first and then changing meaning, identity, all that stuff afterwards. And so, yeah. Really quick, would you mind, since we're right on this topic, flexibility in the human system? Why is that so important when we're looking at predictive processing?
Right. Well, I think that follows very gracefully from what we were just talking about. Flexibility is the ability to adapt in a context-sensitive way to changes in your environmental situation, in the environmental context, whether it's sort of financial or it's pro-social or emotional or physiological. You have to use exactly the interdependencies that constitute your generative model to recognize that you're in this context or that context and adapt in a flexible way, because that has enormous implications to what you attend to, the prior beliefs that you bring to the table. There's another aspect of flexibility here, which I think is important from the psychotherapeutic perspective, which is sometimes you actually have to change your generative model in and of itself because your world has changed. Say you've lost a job, or you've lost a loved one, or you have entered into a new era of life, literally, coming back to the example of a new city. So your world model, your generative model, now needs revising because circumstances have changed. So you have to have the flexibility now to explore new models. And taking the sort of free energy landscape metaphor that we we're just talking about, that basically means having the ability to explore other explanations, other
Mhm.
lows of surprise, which means escaping the sharp valleys, escaping the sort of very precise high curvature landscapes of belief. And of course, again, we come back to um, the importance of flexibility in being able to um, stop yourself being trapped in a particular cognitive habit, reflexive thoughts, obsessional thoughts, say compulsive thoughts, intrusive thoughts that keep recurring. You need to be able to think about another way of and find other narratives and other paths through this sort of landscape of beliefs that just is this free energy landscape.
Beautiful. And this is the thing in psychotherapy, is that cognitive rigidity is the killer. And if you look at yourself, your functional system level layer, as a predictive processing, not machine, an organic system, it just becomes a lot easier to understand. Like, let's give an example: addiction, drugs. When people are going through withdrawals, you know exactly what's happening with predictive. Would you mind running us through something like that? And it's something benign, maybe like I don't know. Um, I was going to say Tylenol, but just let me see if I can get a better example. I don't want to go too off topic into other areas. Um, so whenever somebody is needing a chemical in their body, the predictive process that goes through all of that is very interesting, because when the body doesn't have the chemical, and I may butcher this a little bit, and the professor can help me. When the body doesn't have the chemical, it predicts error and all kinds of things. Would you mind walking through something like that?
But I think drug misuse is probably a really nice example.
Sure.
But it's a particularly important example because the kinds of drugs that usually are drugs of misuse are exactly the drugs that affect those attentional precision weighting mechanisms, which means that they are exactly the kind of drugs that will cause you to be trapped in an orbit of repeated behavior from which you cannot escape.
Yeah.
So, if you just think about the kinds of drugs that people habitually take and sometimes misuse, they are only addictive because they change the precision or the confidence accrued or attributed to certain patterns of behavior and certain sort of cause effect structures in the way that you live your life. However, you don't have to have that sort of direct short circuit of your sense-making machinery, and in particular, the sort of mechanisms of attentional selection that we were talking about before. You can get the same kind of pathology in the absence, even under sort of Bayes optimal sense-making. So imagine that I had a really traumatic experience with a particular interpersonal interaction, say, with a friend or a work colleague. And this was very surprising for me because I have a self model that I don't have traumatic, aversive, chaotic interpersonal relationships. Therefore, I am, for the moment, going to suspend my prior belief that engaging with other people are always going to be familiar, comforting, unsurprising encounters. Therefore, I am now no longer going to engage with other people. I'm going to avoid, I'm going to socially withdraw. But otherwise, I'm going to surprise myself or induce surprise by exposing myself to a very emotionally aversive or surprising encounter. And now I have a picture where I've become withdrawn, socially isolated, possibly depressed. Um, the pernicious aspect of this, which is a little bit like the addiction, but I think probably even more pernicious, is because I am now socially withdrawn.
Mm-hmm.
I now have prevented myself from gathering any evidence that, in fact, my world model is not apt. It's not the right kind of model. I'll never find out that, in fact, 99% of people actually do have comforting, nurturing, um, supportive interactions, or I experience these interactions as nurturing and supportive. So my actual world is actually different from my prior beliefs about the world, but I'll never know because I've stopped myself exploring. So this would be a nice example of the sort of pro-social cognitive flexibility, having the opportunity just to test my hypotheses from time to time to make sure that I'm absolutely right. So, but I can only do that if I explore and I have that kind of active flexibility. And again, it comes to
Exactly.
your notion of sort of, activation. If you can sort of, induce
Mhm.
people's ability or restore their ability to explore again, to, sort of um,
Play to
revisit
activate
their
that
hypothesis.
circuitry. You know what I mean? The play, the care, the seeking. You know,
Yes,
those are the three things that allow our learning to accelerate and explode. Would you agree?
absolutely. And I guess you're speaking also from the perspective of, sorry, attachment theory. Children.
Effective neuroscience. Hank said,
Yeah,
"Oh yeah, no, yes, I was. Yeah. I got you. Sorry. Go ahead. My mind jumps around really quickly. Messed up there. Well, so we could basically say that, because we're talking about surprise, and that's what we're talking about. It's, the unmanageable deviation from these expected states, and that's what you've been describing. So basically, you could say anxiety equals overprediction of threat, or rigidity, like you talked about, is overconfident priors, or depression could even be like collapsed prediction of reward, right? And
yes.
that's
Yeah, you're entering some sort of subtle distinctions here, which
Mhm.
I'm wondering whether we. Um, so I think it'd be useful just to stand back and think about our intentional behavior. Why do we behave like this or like that? And at the moment, we've sort of foregrounded the resolution of uncertainty, where uncertainty is expected surprise. But of course, what you brought to the table, in fact, what we were talking about previously in terms of, say, aversive social encounters, there's another
yeah,
kind of expected surprise, which is encountering situations which are highly uncharacteristic of me, given my model or prior beliefs about the kind of thing that I am. So I'm not going to jump off cliffs. I'm not going to immerse myself in a fire. I am not going to expose myself to outcomes or act in a way that risks inducing or eliciting surprises in the future of any sort. So that's the other way of minimizing expected surprise. And if you now look at the complement of um, expected surprise of this kind, that violates your prior preferences or beliefs about the outcomes that are characteristic of you, then you have a way of thinking about reward. So reward just is the comfortable familiar. I'm the kind of thing that is loved, given strokes of all different kinds, financial, emotional, and everything else that is, if you like, a marker of esteem that reassures me, yes, I am this kind of thing, this good citizen, this good father, this good son.
yep,
Um, so these are rewarding things. These are the things that are not surprising, conditioned upon my generative model of me as what I think I am. And if I think I'm a good person, then I
mhm,
will expect to solicit cues and evidence from the environment that I am a good person. If I think I'm a bad
yeah,
person, then I will also be seeking evidence that I am a bad person and I might behave
yes.
chaotically. This is entirely Bayes optimal. Seeking evidence for the kind of thing that you are is just part and parcel of predictive
Yes.
processing and self-modeling.
And that literally that is the structure underlying all cognitive distortions right there. Every one of them. And there's like 50 of them that Beck and Ellis and all them made up. But it's just crazy to me. And so, the active inference is so awesome to me that I kind of think of it, the way that I look at it in my system is like constrained active inference, because all of my ethics are based on constraint. I'm sure you've heard about that and looked into it. So, I kind of model like the human agent system as like an active inference system, but whose belief updates are constrained by like ethical viability, relational impact, developmental capacity, and long-term meaning coherence, just for adapting and evolving that. So prediction, like you said, does not equal truth in my system. It equals, error does not equal failure. Some error, enables learning, it enables creativity, it enables moral courage, it enables growth through uncertainty, which is the main thing that this allows you to understand. Like once you accept this and understand the evidence, I cannot be certain. I mean, maybe, but this is a fool's errand. Would you agree with that?
No, absolutely. And just to sort of celebrate your use of this notion of constraints, I think that's absolutely right, both intuitively and mathematically. So I often, if I was talking to a statistician, I'd say there are two ways of being Bayes optimal. One is to comply with the principles of optimal Bayesian design, which is designing the right experiments that give you data that has the greatest information. So that is being curious. But there's another kind of Bayes optimality, which is due to Bayesian decision theory, which minimizes my cost or loss function. And that's the constraint part of it. So I think if you put those two bits together, as you have just done, what you're saying is to be Bayes optimal is to be curious under constraints. And it is the constraints that are what I was referring to as the negative reward. It is the surprise. So my prior preferences specify all the constraints on me as the kind of thing I am. Because if I worked towards an outcome, or indeed experienced an outcome that was beyond my constraints, was beyond the kind of thing that I do, you can express this in terms of social norms, institutions, and different aspects of shared self modeling and shared priors that are culturally or encultured, then reward, the cost, the negative reward becomes the cost, but the cost is multidimensional. These are just constraints. Final thing which endorses your use of the word and perspective on defining the kind of thing that I am, in terms of the constraints specifying the kind of thing that I am not. There are many more ways of being dead than there are being alive.
Yes.
Comes from physics. So you could read the free energy principle as due to something called the maximum entropy principle by Jaynes. But the key thing is it's a constrained maximum entropy principle. So even the physics of observation and measurement is all about the constraints. That defines the kind of thing I am, the kind of thing you are, and of course all your clients.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Because this is the thing in psychotherapy, guys. We have to have respect for system survival intelligence. We cannot expect someone, especially in a terrible spot psychotherapeutically, to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They have to act within their constraints, and their system is orienting predictively under those constraints. For you to ask someone to act outside of those constraints beyond their capabilities, in my opinion, is unethical. So, is that something you align with as well, or do you have?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's just basically empowering them to push the boundaries of those constraints is by relaxing these very tight aspects of this, very precise aspects of the landscape of beliefs. And sometimes that requires probably less so in psychotherapy, more in sort of cognitive behavior therapy, holding the patient or the client by the hand, and with them gathering evidence that would challenge their very fixed beliefs.
Yes. Now, I have a big issue with psychotherapy because I do it with a lot of people, and it's my passion. It's what I love: neuroscience, psychology, psychotherapy, all of it. I've been obsessing over it for a decade, and I had to use it for myself as well a lot. And that's I enjoy helping people and loving that way. But this is a big thing for me. If we can look at it this way, that anxiety becomes a hypersensitive threat priors. You know what I mean? It becomes so much more than, well, you're just anxious. That the label can go away to, this is what's happening to your system. Your system is orienting under this set of constraints, and there's nothing wrong with that. You are orienting. There's better ways to do it. We can learn better ways. I just, it drives me insane because a lot of psychotherapists aren't even looking at like effective neuroscience and realizing that we do have to activate those seeking, play, and care circuits in order for learning. Because when fear and panic and rage are activated, even lust, it just destabilizes the whole system, and then that surprise starts happening. So yeah, I'm very much into psychotherapy. I love this kind of stuff. So what I really want with healing is that we create an environment based on constraints that have safe conditions for that systems model, that generative model's revision. And it's not just positive thinking. It's literally making it to where the system can handle more. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been working a lot on that, and I've been trying to talk to a lot of people about it, and I really think it can help psychotherapy in many different ways, because I believe that secure interdependence is a main part of what healing is, besides psychoeducation, understanding the cutting edge like predictive processing, ethical therapy, and titrated philosophy. That's another big thing that I don't like. The philosophy created psychotherapy, and they're not allowed to talk about it. So that does cut the learning down a little bit, since we're trying to form that generative model to match the world as closely as we can, so we have at least free energy goes down. So, but yeah, I just thought I'd bring that out there. Have you met with a lot of psychotherapists who use predictive processing?
Yes, I certainly am exposed to that community on a regular basis, either through sort of academic colleagues and friends who are psychotherapists or experts in various domains of psychotherapy, things like, say, attachment theory, or through the neuropsychoanalysis movement, that is one of the key architects. Interestingly, you've mentioned Panter several times now. He was certainly, I think, one of the giants of that. The other giant, of course, is Mark Soames,
Yes.
who's probably one of the world's experts on Freud, but also uses.
I love psychodynamics, by the way. I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I don't follow psychoanalytics in the old days. But modern psychodynamic theory, I'm all about. There are some people who reject that, but I tie it in. So just to throw it out there.
So you should, if you had space, you should get Mark Soames on. So
Okay,
yeah. So I say he's one of the fathers and a great admirer of not just Freud, but particularly Panksepp,
Excellent.
and but he's also the editor of the revised standard edition of Freud's work, which he took him 30 years to do. But his current passion is very much the things you've been talking about, understanding people from the point of view of predictive processing and active inference, and specifically drilling down the theme that we were just talking about 20 minutes ago, which is feeling. So the essence of feeling, and he would associate feeling with exactly the volume gain that you were talking about when we were talking about affording prediction errors precision, or the ability to change my mind, the things that underwrite attentional selection. So from his point of view, to experience something and to feel it is to attend to it. And this necessarily involves all these mechanisms of focused attention, and all the neurochemistry, and also the functional anatomy and neuropsychology of the systems that actually mediate this. And that brings us back to those systems that are responsive to psychoactive drugs and psycholytics and psychomimetics.
Yeah. I would like to bring up how most of the psychology and philosophy world likes to think third person about our CNSs when we are literally existing within the constraints we are measuring. That blows my mind.
Well,
when philosophers think about philosophy as objects, or psychologists do that, and you're like, you are that.
Well,
you are embodied.
Thomas, how many philosophical systems don't take the real world constraints into consideration? So all of a sudden you get this and I don't know what Karl thinks about this, but you get these philosophical worldviews or prescriptions that are born of false descriptions, in that they are falsely assuming that the prescription can actually be obtained, or like if someone is prescribing some kind of absolutely certain epistemic standard, that would be a grave error, in my opinion, a lack of wisdom. So, it's important not to confuse the descriptive and prescriptive nature of cognition, I think.
Yeah. Paul, you have any on that?
No, I agree entirely. A phrase comes to mind, which increasingly comes to mind in relation to the way that philosophers try to understand themselves. And I've heard this in sort of Eastern culture, the light that cannot illuminate itself.
Hmm.
From my point of view, more as a meteorological physicist, just a simple observation: a ruler cannot measure itself. So self-knowledge is something which may be quintessentially elusive, which means that the next best thing is to try and know something that's as similar to me as possible, which is you. So I think you can excuse psychologists for treating subject as object, simply because there may be something completely impenetrable about knowing oneself.
Yeah, well, you also you also outline the communal interdependence of epistemology, or knowing, as a necessity, because we must find a way to get out of our own minds, even if we cannot escape our experience. Two different things, in my opinion.
Yeah, we're predicting generative models of other humans in our environment, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you could argue that indeed the hypothesis that I am me rests upon exactly that. The fact that there are lots of things like me around, so I have to have a notion of other, and I have to have a notion of other before I can have a notion of self as an inference from the best speculation. So I think there's more potency than one might imagine behind what you've just said. The fact that we do have common ground, that we share, that we co-create, both in the moment and through cultural, niche construction and evolutionary psychology. I think that's foundational and possibly necessary just to have a notion of self.
Yes.
And that's interesting that you outlined that. One of my biggest focuses, the second Pangburn virtue, of course, is well-being. And by well-being, I simply mean physical, mental, and social health. And I find that third pillar, social health, is so understated in so many readings I take in on like kind of general pop psychology, or like self-help psychology world. Like they're very much like dumbed down, lower resolution popular stuff. I find that like there's a lot of these like I guess self-help gurus out there that completely eliminate talking about that third pillar of social health. They talk about mental health, they talk about one's physical health, and then that's it. The episode is over. And I'm like, did we not just miss one of the most important pillars? Would we not think a general practitioner to be somewhat insane and not living up to their job description if they didn't address the social health of the patient that comes to see them? Like this is of course necessary. So I put so much emphasis. I try to put so much emphasis on the social health element, because even though some people like Aristotle and thinkers throughout history, acknowledged that, things like friendship ought be taken seriously as a practice, not like something you do when you have when you might have time to practice, or like even more so in like Epicurean thought. But I just think there needs to be more of an emphasis when we're talking about well-being in medicine as well, on on social health. And I know, in many forms of medicine and in Western medicine and in Canada, which I'm quite familiar with, social health is a very, very heavy focus for practitioners. And I think that's a great thing, but I don't see that laterally across the board around the world. So, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Go ahead, Carl. Would you like to comment?
Well, just to endorse that point, I mean, I'm just playing in my mind with the sort of the notion of interdependence and
Yeah.
intersubjectivity, and I think social health does emphasize the intersubjectivity. It's always
Attachment
about
science.
yes,
Attachment science, right? Secure
yes.
interdependence is what heals. It's what the healthiest human systems in dyads operate on, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought you were referring to before when you talk about secure attachment. Secure attachment
Yes.
allows you to explore. It's enabling, but you have to have a secure attachment before you can do that exploration.
Correct. That's where learning happens. Secure attachment, secure interdependence. Not codependency, not anxious avoidant, any of this. Secure, and so that plays to the state of affairs synthetically, and in terms of like if you were to move up fractals, in terms of not just metaphorically, structurally, I guess I could say. Because the local structures, I believe, are encoded in the global structures in different resolutions. That's the way that my mind works and looks at philosophy and science. So I guess I want to jump really quick because I wanted to talk to you about this. We talk. I kind of want to go a little bit more into psychotherapy, if that's okay with you. Um, so active inference, so I have a system. I'm not going to say its name or anything because it doesn't matter. I've been working with AI. I've been trying to figure out many different ways to incorporate many different hybrid principles like predictive processing, memory reconsolidation, everything that I can possibly find from the cutting edge. And I've put a few things together that I think do help, and I've tried to put them into practice, and they seem to work. So action selection is a part of what, it's like choosing without paralysis, coercion, or false certainty. And this ties directly into predictive processing. Action selection here is like my formal solution to the final bottleneck, the knowing enough to act without waiting for certainty and without betraying your values. I think most suffering systems, CBT, DBT, all those by themselves, because I incorporate those, they fail there. People understand, they reflect, they imagine, they even care and love, and still freeze. You know what I mean? Still fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And, I think insight that cannot become action becomes rumination in disguise. And so what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's exactly right, and it speaks to what we were talking about before in terms of being stuck in a rut,
Mm-hmm.
being trapped in certain sort of orbits of inaction, failing to explore. So, action selection in active inference is exactly that evaluation of the different courses of action in terms of how much does this action resolve my expected surprise or my
Yeah.
uncertainty? How does it comply with constraints of a Bayesian sort, whilst also affording information gain? But if I've got unduly precise beliefs about all the alternative courses of action open to me, then I'm going to really compromise that flexibility and that latitude that I have for choosing the most appropriate way forward, the most appropriate path into the future. And that's basically, what we were, I think, talking about previously, when you get stuck in a rut. And that means your prior commitment to this course, which is usually inaction or social withdrawal or a failure to try something else. Um, uh, um, I mean, OCD being a perfect example.
That's me.
Yeah. So, these are just examples of completely base optimal, initially base optimal commitments to one action, one path, one intended behavior amongst the
Yeah.
repertoire of ones that you could select among, which at one point in time would have been the optimal choice. But the world has changed and there is
Yeah.
now no longer the optimal choice. But you don't know that because you've got this very, very precise, very rigid way of basically not acting in a more exploratory, in a more accommodating, in a more flexible kind of way. So I think that the action selection is absolutely it, and it comes back to our sort of original thoughts that to exchange with the world is to have to do so in a way that you are doing active sensing. So,
Yes.
if you can't act, you're not sense making. And if you're not sense making, you don't know how to act. The whole cycle just collapses.
You can't perceive without the first. It's locked in a loop. There's no
Well, and
escaping.
Thomas, how much does this relate to praxis?
Oh my
Our
gosh, man.
deep conversations about
Yeah.
how much praxis of any new knowledge, how much the practice of it influences cognition, the feedback we get, and all that stuff. Putting all this stuff into practice. We are actionable beings. Without action, what are we?
Yeah. That's why I say embodiment, and that's why I live neurophenomenologically, because I mean, my philosophy, my ethics of love and constraints and all these kind of things that I hold dear move my hand. You know what I mean? That's the interesting thing, is that that narrative, that language, those feelings, those prediction errors, all of that moves me. It is what philosophically, ethically, and neurodynamically moves me. I mean, that is just the case, and as far as I'm concerned. So what I would say, Professor, is that my claim would be one part of the system is that action does not require certainty. It requires interdependent responsibility under constraint. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes. Well, I
Excellent.
certainly agree with that, given that from my point of view, action is there to resolve uncertainty. So yes, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. That's awesome. So like there's five, I'm gonna run through these five gates that I made. They're like action gates. Okay. So the first one is a capacity gate. Can I realistically do this right now as a person? Includes energy, emotional regulation, resources, safety. I don't think action is ethical if it breaks the agent.
Yeah, so I think those have been neatly subsumed under the constraints we were talking about before. So you could write that down mathematically as violating any of these constraints in these dimensions was very surprising. So that would be part of the uh,
Yeah.
Bayesian decision theoretic aspect of the way that you score different actions. Absolutely.
Where comes the thought of I can go outside of my constraints? Is that what where does that come from, do you think?
Well, strictly speaking, from a maths point of view, from the physics point of view,
Yeah.
you can't and you don't. You could be. I could read that question as why is it that some people are self-destructive? Why is it
Okay,
that
that's a good question. Yeah.
why, for example, do some people commit suicide?
Yeah.
Isn't this the most surprising thing possible to cease to exist?
Yeah.
Um, I would say no. I think that if you now think about um, quite unsurprising instances of self-destruction, such as sacrificing yourself on the field of war for
Yeah.
your brother in arms, this is exactly the least surprising thing to do if you are a man of honor and are prepared to lay down your life for your brother in arms. So,
Mhm.
from the sort of dispassionate mathematical definition of what it is to have constraints specified in terms of their implausibility, given the kind of thing you are, I think you cannot surprise yourself in that sense because if you did, you would cease to be that kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree entirely. Let me run through these gates real quick because I want your opinions on them. So the harm gate would be the second one. What is the likely harm to self and other? Um, harm awareness and repair readiness. That's a big thing as I use attachment science theory and therapy and map it to society. I don't think there's a difference between individual dyad culture and society. I really don't. And well, obviously there are like individual nuances between those layers, but I mean they all interact, right? Interdependence, and so that's a big thing is repair for me because if things can't repair people, cognition, consciousnesses interacting with each other, then there is no connection and there is no survival. And so
Yes.
I consider it extraordinarily structural, a thing called repair. And it's, that I think it's necessary metaphorically with everything that we interact with.
Yeah, and I remember similar discussions with psychotherapists in terms of rupture and repair, the
Yes,
opportunity.
that's exactly what it is. Yep, that's it.
And again, mathematically, that's almost required, in the sense that there has to be this sort of cyclical aspect as we move around within the characteristic states that define us, as again the kind of thing that we are. Necessarily, I have to move away from and revisit certain states of being. So, in an emotional or certainly dyadic context, that will look a little bit like varying degrees of rupture and repair. It can be no other way. If you can't return or you can't repair, you can't have an attracting set, you can't have survival, you can't have
No.
sustainability, you can't apply the free energy principle. So I think that almost defines itself. And again, I put the harm in this
Yeah,
intersubjective context that it
exactly.
is. If I am part of an ensemble, an ecosystem, a family, an institution, um,
Hmm.
then my surprise is going to be intimately bound up with your surprise because we
Yes.
share common ground.
Yes. And interdependence means I have a response. Let's talk about responsibility gate. Can this be reversed or undone? That's a big thing about in predictive processing with humans, and that's why I wanted to understand these gates about like constraint levels. And the responsibility is a big one, right? We can't ask for responsibility outside of constraints. That would be unethical and impossible, basically. Um, and so when reversibility is high in therapy, people can act sooner. But when it's low, they slow down. And so that directly ties to predictive processing. Would you mind going into that?
I would imagine that the reversibility here is very closely related to that sort of um, ability to keep yourself within
Yes.
an
Hmm.
attracting set. Um, you know, One could also argue that um, part of maintaining an itinerant journey through life, a life encompassing everything from
Yeah.
physiology through to interpersonal relationships, um, will will require a notion of again return and reversibility. I'm sort of half stuttering here because there's a really interesting connection with uh,
It's okay. I know I'm asking weird questions, but like this ties into responsibility for me because we owe it to each other interdependently because what affects you affects me. There is no way to separate that on any ontological level that would matter to the meso level, our daily life, And so the reversibility comes here is like, what am I responsible for? What can I reverse? And this comes up a lot in therapy is like, a lot of despair and shame spirals and guilt spirals are based on this is irreversible, and
yes,
and inability to accept irreversibility.
yes.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess responsibility is quite key in the sense that having a sense of responsibility is one way of saying that uh, you are equipped with a sense of agency in the sense that you have a narrative model of the
Mhm.
consequences of your actions, so that as an agent you are responsible for your action. Um,
Yeah.
so you could actually argue that in the absence of a sense of responsibility, there is no true agency because you don't have a generative model that
Yes.
assigns you as the agent of these consequences. So perhaps responsibility read in that sort of more elemental way is absolutely foundational for any
Yeah.
agency, certainly an
Yeah.
agency in a society.
Thank you for navigating through that question. I just kind of want to see how your expertise in this ties to how I'm doing therapy because I just any help that I can get, right? You know what I mean? I always want help and advice. I'm super fallible and I'm a big kid, so I make mistakes all the time. But the fourth one, we'll go through these real quick, and then I may jump Travis in because he's probably got some really good questions because you and I have been nerding out for a while. The other one's the alignment gate. You know, does this action cohere with my values as lived, not idealized? That's the whole embodying, living, understanding that you are making predictions and all this kind of stuff. So there is no perfect alignment with that world prediction and the internal generative model. There is no perfect. There never will be perfect alignment, will there be?
No,
No,
absolutely. Yeah.
ever.
And
And you
again,
know,
I like alignment because
mhm,
I repeat from a purely again the physics of self-organization actually
mhm,
have a very clear mathematical description of the kind of alignment you're talking about, which celebrates the conditional independency induced by the Markov blanket, but
yes,
celebrates it in the sense that it joins you to the lived world, and if the lived world is somebody else, it joins two people together. And it could actually be an artificial intelligence as well. But the alignment is manifest in terms of something called generalized synchrony or synchronization of chaos. Synchronization of this kind just is the free energy minimizing solution. So if we can find that synchronization manifold where we're both literally on the same page and we
yep,
are synchronized, even though we are individuated because there's a Markov blanket between us. So I'm me and
yes,
you're still you, and yet we're on the same manifold. We are
perfect.
aligned. That is the free energy minimizing solution. So I like
Yeah,
alignment. Yeah.
that is the interdependence principle that I'm talking about. You just laid it out perfectly. The fifth one is future agent gate. Will the future generative model of me still align with my values? Will it still be appreciative of the generative model of the past, as in the system orienting that a lot of patients will be like, they won't understand that they're system oriented naturally under those constraints, and there is nothing immoral about that specific, especially in psychotherapy, right? We're not talking about like prison cases, things like that. We're talking about in psychotherapy, people who really truly need help. And a lot of it is I have this generative model, and then the future generative model is going to hate the old one. You know what I mean? And that's a prediction error, wouldn't you say? Like meta level?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Absolutely. I have a friend in neurology, Thomas Parr, and his colleague Giovanna Pizzulo, who actually sort of have a very related notion in terms of how far I had to deviate from my prior beliefs about the outcomes of my behavior. And that's basically cognitive effort. So if you have to work hard at something, that's the price you pay for departing in terms of your future from your future self, um, or departing from your current self to your future self. But I think there's a deeper sense, and that's absolutely right. Uh, which you start off with while talking about survival and sustainability, the very sense that we have this belief that we endure over time, that I am the same person that I was when I was 25. I'm the same person who went to sleep last night. I am the same person that will be talking in 20 seconds. That's quite a gift, isn't it? It's absolutely amazing. You can't imagine a thermostat or a goldfish having that kind of existential survivalism, this notion that I persist through time. And of course, that only works if your prior beliefs about the kind of thing that you are, which entail all the constraints that we've been talking about. In fact, most of the other four safeguards, or constraints that you've described, that cannot change. That is the definition of what you are, and it is
Yeah.
the mathematically the pullback attractor, or the set of characteristic states to which you are attracted just in
Yeah.
surviving and in existing. So I think there's something quite fundamental about that. That if you change the kind of thing you are, then you are no longer what you were, which is the
Yeah.
denial
Yeah.
of surviving as you. Although of
Yeah.
course you can learn to change. That's
As that system layer evolves, so does the narrative and self layer. because that narrative itself is an instrument of the system. It's not unreal. It's very much real. Like I said, it moves. I believe it moves our bodies. Um, and so, but now I'm going to shut up for a second and let Travis ask a question.
Well, no, I think this has been fantastic, and I think it's important for us to try to abstract as much important wisdom from someone like Karl whenever we get this brilliant opportunity. And as a moral well-beingist, I'm always, of course, hyper fixated and interested on focusing on how we might maximize well-being for humanity by ways of important pieces of knowledge that really aren't in the general public's consciousness, or important prescriptions. So, Karl, just if you wouldn't mind, what are some important descriptive facts or descriptive pieces of information or prescriptions you have for humanity that you think are very much underplayed and not given enough attention, given all of your years of experience here? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Me too.
I think the thing that comes to mind is particularly prescient in relation to what we've been talking about in terms of intersubjectivity, and something that was mentioned earlier on, which was implicitly a scale invariant aspect to the way that we work collectively. So if you sort of write that down mathematically, this is something called the renormalization group, but I think more intuitively it just can be understood in terms of the survivability, the sustainability, the endurance, the avoiding of surprises and catastrophes and harm and upset and everything else associated with negative valence, is in of itself a scale invariant or scale free thing, which very simply put means that my brain, in fact, every cell in my brain depends upon the brain surviving and enduring in the way that a brain should. And at the same time, the brain only functions because the ensemble of cells that constitute that brain exist. But exactly the same rule, the surprise minimizing rule, the mutual predictability, the alignment, the interdependency, the intersubjectivity we've been talking about, applies to my brain as part of my body. I have to have a body in order to support the brain. But of course, the brain changes and deploys the body both autonomically and in terms of movement. My body only survives because of my familial eco-niche, because of the people that are around me, the people I exchange with. That family only survives because there is a culture, a local culture, a state, a theological structure that it only provides the right context for me to survive in as a family. And of course, that culture is created by. So again, we've got this circular causality, both the top-down and the bottom-up causation now between scales, and all the way through to the biosphere and possibly the universe. So what that means is that we have to attend to health at every level, coming back very much to your argument about social health. So for me, health just means remaining in the characteristic states of the system so defined. It is a statement of sustainability. It is a statement that this system is self-organizing to its characteristic states, non-surprising, comfortable, rewarded, if you like, states that will endure over time. But for that to happen, it has to happen at every scale, all the time, everywhere at once. And if you don't appreciate that, then notions like, for example, move fast and break things, do not reveal themselves as being extremely disruptive and probably portending angst and upset and repair somewhere down the line. Another thing which I think emerges from that perspective is the importance of the sparsity and the careful selection. So before we were talking about attentional selection. So we don't attend to everything.
Yeah.
We very carefully pick out those things that we attend to that will inform us, those things in which we, in one sense, place epistemic trust. That's true at every scale. And if it's true at every scale, it means that there are certain dangers in over-connectivity,
Yes.
overexposure, fake news,
Yes.
for example.
Hmm.
So I think that these arguments have particular weight at the moment, certainly given the geopolitical climate and the quality and the quantity of interpersonal exchange on things like social media. And indeed, we're seeing now society's reaction to that in terms of events in Australia or Californian court cases in terms of, did the algorithm cause addiction deliberately? Is that the right kind of value function? So these are just, I think, manifestations of a larger theme, which is all about careful, scale invariant, selective communication between people or institutions, or indeed going right back, brain cells in my brain.
Wow.
Yes.
Yes.
All system.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, and it's very much those prescriptions that are baked in there by way of description are very much how what I think is important to try and educate the public on. And I mean, yeah, Thomas and I are obsessed with constraint based ethics and
Yes.
epistemology, and
Mathematically, all
yeah,
of it.
and
Yeah.
we talk about this a lot. Just one of the reasons, because we just have taken in so many different thinkers over the years that did not start off on the realist foot, did not start off with the beautiful modeling and information that we have available that must be considered, that must be a constraint on whatever we are going to be prescribing to the world. So thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah, that's awesome. My friend, I don't want to keep you too long, but I could do this 10 hours. OCD and this is my stuff. Oh, but anyway, seriously.
There's always a
Is
chance
there
for
anything else?
episode 2, Thomas.
Yeah, I really want you to come back as many times as you want because this is so fun for me. Oh my gosh. Anyway, but yeah, thank you so much. It's been about an hour and a half. I don't want to keep you too much longer than that. I think we're going to go like 90 to 120 minutes on these shows. Next time you come back, if you want to stay for 4 hours, you can. 'Cause I've loved it so much. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom and everything else. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed talking to both of
Great.
you.
Yeah,
You're very
Thank you, Karl.
so
energetic.
much.
I feel quite exhausted now. I'm going to go away and have my cigarette now because
Yeah, very good.
I
Very
can't
good.
live.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, we'll be in touch. Have a
Thank you,
good
sir.
one. Bye.
And you. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
All right.
Well, how did you feel, Thomas?
Awesome.
Right on.
Awesome.
Perry,
got to talk with my peeps.
it would be cool to get Perry's perspective because he listened.
Yeah.
No, that guy was. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
That guy was incredible. Whenever I see an older kind of established fellow like that, it always gives me PTSD of you know who, Thomas. I won't say any name since this will be posted, but no, that guy was like synthesizing. That guy was like synthesizing everything that you guys were saying and explaining what he teaches using the language that you guys brought up to him, and I thought that was incredible.
Oh yeah, I love that. Man, the way that he spoke in my language was awesome. I really appreciated that. You can tell that he's interacted with psychology his entire life. Anyway, go ahead.
For me, it's no shock at all that when I ran him through the Pangburn virtue analysis system, that he scored a
Wait.
Okay, yeah. Make your guess.
Yeah.
Perry's
Yeah, make your
good
guess.
Perry's good at this.
He is. He's quite the guesser.
I'll go. Usually, I'll go like a 8.4.
Okay, so, I'm just so blown away. But yeah, he scored at 8.1 based on the works available online.
8.3.
Today in this dialogue, I would score him even higher. But what strikes me about him as a thinker is his fallibilism, the unique. He is uniquely great in that category. You can tell that he is clarifying his fallibility by underlying underlying particular obstructions to his current position, but also in the way that he clarifies with language and underlines, you know, the revisionism, the open to update. I just get the sense that I'm talking to someone that is very much listening, which listening and being present in the moment is a huge part of fallibilism. You know, not simply delivering a script. Like I'm sure we've all heard many science communicators out there who just simply are there in a conversation to deliver a script, which is not fallibilist in action at all. So, you know, he on this, based on all of his work, gets a 9.5 out of 10, which is an incredibly high fallibilism score for a thinker. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. You
did great too, Thomas.
Yep.
What's that?
Fantastic.
You did great too.
Yep.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is where I get in the nitty gritty. We could have gone even more nerd, but people would have been like rolling their eyeballs back in their heads. So
Yeah.
He said something.
Yeah, go ahead.
He said something funny. I don't know if he did it on purpose, but he was talking about Freud, and so you know, there's like the NRSV Bible. He was like, yeah, there's like the new revised standard version of Freud nowadays, and I don't know if he said that unironically or if he said.
I don't know. That is a book. That is actually a book, and it's a dude who compiled basically.
Oh, okay.
It's one of the best like compilations of Freud and like analysis of him and his work and everything. It's insane.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Regardless.
This dialogue we just had too, I just wanted to speak on lightheartedness for a bit. Do you notice that he is not giving us direct expressions, explicit expressions of his sense of humor directly, but look at his behavior. Look at how he expresses his ideas. The entire thing is lighthearted.
Yeah.
It's not coming from even when he's talking about things that relate to depression, anxiety, stress, a lot of people are like, well, how would one, or why should one even deliver that information in a lighthearted fashion? Lightheartedness does not mean that seriousness must die. This is
Correct.
A perfect example of a person who is dealing in very serious territory and serious within serious contexts. The most serious, but I think is effective in his communication for one of the main reasons being that it comes from a lighthearted nature. It comes through a lighthearted lens. And I very much appreciated that about him.
Yeah, the joke, the little like, you know, oh, I'm gonna have a cigarette, you know, I'm exhausted. Like,
Yeah.
He also like, it wasn't like a critique to Thomas, but he was like, okay, like this seems very like we should take a step back.
Yeah.
I forget exactly.
I was going really deep. I didn't mean to go that deep that quickly. My brain.
Yeah, no, the way that he like said that, at least me in my monotone voice, I know that if I say that, that could definitely be, most people will perceive that as passive aggression, and all of a sudden I'm facing the defensive player of the year, and people, you know, get all defensive on me. But the way he did it was like, I don't know, it was very, he was a very wise individual.
Exactly. I'll tell you both why right now. I've studied body language and speech prosody and all kinds of things like that, right? Micro expressions. People telling you that they can read body language of like leaders in 5 minutes, that's horse shit. There are things called like thin slices and all this kind of stuff that you can add. Regardless, he did things like lean up like this and put his shoulders, which was really cool, which means he's interested, he's waiting, he's listening, and that's awesome. And he also, when he said, let's hold back for a minute, he didn't put it at me, he put it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He just put it out. and there was no tone raised or anything like that. He was just saying, "Hey, let's not go that deep for a second," and that's beautiful. I did get myself out of control.
But you're right.
Awesome.
That kind of use of language. This is another communication element to talk about within the virtue score. Is like when he says something like, well, let's take a second to step back here and analyze some of this because, we've opened a lot of can of worms or whatever. That lack of targeting you as the problem, Thomas, is a massive uptick in the helpfulness of his communicative nature. And that's just another thing that I was blown away by conversing with this individual. I had to jump off for a minute there because I got an important call came in and I had to take it. But
I knew you would love Karl. I knew you guys would love him. That's why I wanted him so bad because I knew his personality. Yeah. I'd studied this stuff for years.
And look, as far as I'm concerned, he's right on with these fundamental well-being prescriptions. Obviously he understands that education and ignorance is at the root of why a lot of this stuff is not in the general consciousness, and just there's so much that he would love for human beings, in general, to understand about cognitive constraints and all this other stuff, so that we are starting on the realist foot. But.
Yeah, exactly. And the other cool thing about him, if you want to notice some psychology that's awesome about him, is when I said OCD, he definitely knew exactly my past in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Because he's been in this. He's a mathematician, a neuroscientist, and he's been in the psychology, psychotherapy universe for years. I mean, he is one of the tops, and he deserves it because he's a good dude and collaborates and all kinds of stuff. So
secretly,
yeah, I'll be I'm fanboying. I will be emailing him again. We will be having him again. So.
Yeah, please, and let's send him an amazing thank you as well. And he's someone that if we do a neuroscience expose overseas, we must have him on stage on the panel for sure.
Make it an event where he could smoke a cig on stage if he feels like it.
Yeah,
and smoke. He's enacting his own prediction error when he doesn't smoke.
What do you think, Thomas? Should we end the video there then?
Yeah, let's cut it right now. Love you guys. Okay. Appreciate you coming.
Yep. Smash that comment section and comment on the like button.